CNN is now reporting that San Francisco police have identified a suspect in the Doodler case. Investigators say he would meet his victims in the gay bars, then charm them by sketching a portrait of them just before he took their lives. 14 people, all believed to be gay, were killed from January 1974 to September 1975.
The Doodler. Between 1974 and 1975, 5 gay men were found murdered in San Francisco after having their likeness sketched by someone who came to be known as the Doodler. Most of them were customers of Castro's bar, who were perhaps flattered by the attention of the illustrator. They were all found on waterfronts and parks in the Ocean Beach area of the city, having been brutally stabbed and mutilated. At 1:57 a.m. on January the 27th, 1974, a corpse was found near the water at Ocean Beach. The victim had been stabbed multiple times, and there was evidence of a defensive stab wound on his left hand. He was wearing a t-shirt, jacket, pants, and shoes, with $21.12 in cash in his pocket. On his wrist was a Timex brand watch. There were signs of only slight rigor mortis to the victim's body, which proved to investigators that the murder had occurred that night. After forensic testing, the victim was confirmed to be 49-year-old Gerald Cananow. 5 months later, another body was found at Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park. The victim was later identified as 27-year-old Joseph Stevens, who usually went by Jay. It was presumed by police that Jay had visited the park with the killer, where they were then stabbed 3 times. He was last seen the previous night, June 24th, leaving Castro's club. Only a month later, 31-year-old German man Klaus Christmann was found dead at the foot of Lincoln Way on Ocean Beach. This attack was a lot more brutal than the previous two. Christmann had been stabbed at least 15 times, and his throat was slashed in 3 separate places, nearly decapitating him. Christmann was last seen at the Bojangles Gay Dance Club the night before. The newspaper, The Sentinel, ran its first story on the murders at this time and suggested Klaus had homosexual propensities after a makeup tube was found in the pocket of his jacket. Almost a year later, a hiker found another corpse, that of 32-year-old Frederick Capin. He was found behind a sand dune, and it appeared he had been dragged approximately 20 feet. Again, the cause of death was a brutal stabbing, this time of the aorta and the heart. Only a month later, on June 4th, 1975, the last known victim of the Doodler was found, Harold Goldberg, who was a Swedish man and sailor by profession. Harold was found on a Lincoln Park golf course by a hiker. He was slashed across the neck and his pants were unzipped. The San Francisco Chronicle reported at the time that he had been dead for approximately 2 whole weeks. Near the end of 1975, 2 people were separately attacked in an apartment complex. One victim spoke further with the police, and what they learned led them to believe that these 2 cases were linked with the other 5 murders. Police were able to create a sketch of the supposed Doodler, believed to be between 19 and 25 years old, black, lanky, and around 6 feet tall. From further witness testimonies, detectives believed that the Doodler had a quiet, serious personality, with an upper-middle-class education and above-average intelligence. They also believed that he lived in the Bay Area, but not San Francisco, and only came to the city on weekends. As of now, this horrific man, the Doodler, has not been identified. The Severed Leg Killer. Between the years of 2000 and 2001, the people of Istanbul were terrorized by an unknown murderer whose modus operandi was to leave the severed legs of their victims around the city. On January 8, 2000, a man was collecting papers out of a rubbish bin when he noticed that some of the papers were stained with what looked like blood. After digging around to find the source of the stains, he found a severed human leg. Officers from the nearby Unidentified police station arrived on the scene, but after searching the surrounding area, were not able to locate the rest of the body or any other evidence of the murder. After forensic examination, it was discovered that the severed leg belonged to a female between the ages of 26 and 27. It was cut cleanly from the hip and was described as being well groomed with no hair and pedicured nails. It was determined to have been severed at the earliest 24 hours before it was found, and at the latest 3 days. 4 months later, a boat was docked at the Eminönü port in Istanbul, and the captain began to notice the sound of something knocking against the bow. When he went to check the source of the noise, he saw what he thought was a mannequin leg. However, on further inspection, he realized it was real. The Unidentified police were informed, but before they were able to arrive, a passenger on the same boat reported another leg washed ashore. Both legs were taken for forensic examination, and it was determined that they belonged to the same person, a woman aged between 25 and 30. so from this we can deduce that the attacks were targeted. Due to accelerated decomposition from being in salt water, police guessed that the legs had been severed between 7 and 10 days before they were found. Similarly, with the first leg 4 months earlier, these two were cut cleanly and also described as being well groomed with red nail polish. 7 months later, on December 7th, 2000, a group of high school students came across a fourth leg. Again, it was described as hairless and pedicured, and severed extremely precisely. It was determined by police to have belonged to someone whose occupation required them to stand 7 to 8 hours a day. It seemed to have only been severed a couple days prior to its discovery. At this time, police had absolutely no leads, as there was no other evidence left behind that could help them identify either the victims or the killer. On the 12th of March 2001, 2 legs were found in the suburb of Hadar. Both had been severed below the knee this time. They were 50 meters apart and placed in garbage bags. Strangely though, they belonged to 2 different people. One, a woman in her early 20s and a man in his late 20s. Like the other legs, the female ones were carefully severed. However, the man's leg was roughly cut, like it had been hacked, and forensic testing confirmed traces of alcohol and drugs in his blood. A 17-year-old girl named Yasmin Durgan was reported missing by her family in the next few days. Then on the 22nd of March, another leg was found. This time at the Tunnel, a section of the train line operating in Istanbul. 2 days later, Yasmin's bag was found at Gümüşsuyu Park with nothing stolen. Her family consented to a DNA test on the leg to see if it was Yasmin, and sadly, it was. She would be the only victim of the severed leg killer to be identified. On July 20th, a final leg was found at a beach in Maltepe. It was determined to have belonged to a man in his early 30s and was severed at the knee. Like the other leg belonging to a male, this one was found to have traces of alcohol in the blood. In 2002, 3 more legs were found separately in Istanbul. However, police believe these to be the work of copycats. Richard Walter, an American psychologist, would create a criminal profile of the killer based on the limited evidence. He determined that the perpetrator likely wanted the legs to be found so that they could sow fear in the community and gain credit for their crimes. Based on the state of the first few legs that were discovered, police believed they belonged to prostitutes. Walter purported that the killer initially targeted prostitutes, yet later moved on to killing random people once they realized they were getting away with their crimes. The severed leg killer is yet to be found. Truly mysterious. The I-70 killer, our last killer. The Interstate 70 highway, also known as the I-70, runs between Baltimore, Maryland and Cove Fort, Utah, and between April and May of 1992 it was linked indefinitely with a series of murders. On April 8, 1992, 26-year-old Robin Faldauer was working alone at Payless Shoe store in Indianapolis. At around 1:30 p.m., a customer entered the store and shot her in the back of the head. She was found in a storage room at the rear of the shop at around 3 p.m. and $100 was missing from the register. 3 days later in Wichita, Kansas, Patricia Smith and Patricia Majors were working at LeBride, the Elegant shop. The woman had stayed behind after hours before they had a customer, because they had a customer that was scheduled to pick up a suit. It is assumed by police that the 2 women let the killer inside, thinking that it was the customer they were expecting. Both women were shot. Not long after, the actual customer arrived to pick the suit up and came face to face with the murderer. The murderer asked the man to come to the back of the store with him, but he refused and fled the scene. He later provided important details to the police and described him as a slender, white man with reddish-colored hair. On April 27th, 40-year-old Michael McCown was working at his mother Sylvia's ceramics store in Terre Indiana. At around 4 p.m., Michael was kneeling to stock shelves when he was shot from behind by an unknown assailant. His wallet and less than $50 was stolen from the store, and there were no witnesses. We know now that Michael was the only man murdered by the I-70 killer, and police have suggested that the killer chose the store because it was named after a woman, assuming that it would be a female working there that day. A week later, 24-year-old Nancy Kitzmiller was working by herself at Boot Village in St. Charles, Missouri. She wasn't actually meant to work that day, but was called in because her co-worker was sick. Nancy opened the shop at 12 p.m. and just after 2:30 p.m. she was found dead by customers. Having been shot execution style in the back of the head, a small amount of money had also been taken from the register. A witness would come forward stating that they had seen Nancy talking to a customer right before she was murdered. 4 days later in Raytown, Missouri, 37-year-old Sarah Blessing was working at her gift shop named Store of Many Colors. The owner of the video shop next door saw a man enter the shop, heard a pop, and then saw him leave. A worker at a grocery shop nearby saw the same man. walking towards the I-70. The video shop owner discovered Sarah's body after he went to check what had occurred next door. Homicide detective Mike Crook was the first policeman on the scene. He found a small amount of cash was missing from the register, yet suggested that money wasn't the primary motive. Detective Crook noted that the killer had left behind identical bullet shell casings at all of their crime scenes, and the murders were committed with a .22 caliber firearm. Based on witness descriptions, the I-70 killer was described as a white man in his 20s or 30s, 5'7" to 5'9", tall, thin, with reddish blonde hair and lazy eyelids. Quite a terrifying description if you ask me. In 2021, the St. Charles Police Department published age-progressed photos of the killer, believing him to be between 52 and 70 years of age now. Anyone with information should call St. Charles Police at 800-800-3510. A $25,000 reward is being offered as the I-70 killer has still not been found.